Hi, I'm Rebecca.
I'm Mehran.
Great to join Baha'i blog, and we're talking about work life today. Excellent. All right.
So first question, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Ooh, well, different phases, different things. Ballerina, opera singer,
Well, I want to hear this.
farmer,
Well,
vet. Not doing any of those things.
so nothing, specific.
I love it.
Similarly, I went through different sort of things. For the longest time, I wanted to be a property developer, at one point art dealer, and then, doing what I do now, working in tech, building products and services. Yeah,
How do you bring your spiritual self to work?
it's a good one. I would say this idea of those daily habits. So, bringing yourself to account each day or reflecting on the past day, the obligatory prayer, when that is happening, and your daily reading of the writings. Yeah, when I'm in the zone and I'm really good and diligent about those daily habits, it impacts my work, and I would say that's probably the strongest kind of you know correlation or corollary. But then beyond that, I think again it's like any aspect of life, right? That being conscious about it being a sphere in which you can learn about the expression of these principles being applied to challenges. I think that's just, it's an interesting question.
Yeah,
'Cause to me, it's like, well, isn't that what it just means
It's sort of
to be a
contiguous.
human being, or to be
Yeah.
a spiritual being is just intrinsic to being a human. And so, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I guess that sort of concept that of our, the nobility of people, what that means and how you interact with them. Being mindful of that. I just I feel so strongly about every individual is on their own path and journey to that they've got that sort of nobleness of spirit, and they're on their own path to developing, learning, and growing as you are. And if it's just even sort of conceptualizing that in the workplace and trying to put that frame over how you work with people. There are some really specific things, I guess, maybe not, and maybe these are sort of some really important kind of Baha'i concepts about what it means to be, to be able to operate in these really kind of complex environments and learn together. And, consultation is a really fundamental element of that. And I find that just so powerful at work. So it's not necessarily my spiritual self, but I guess it is sort of thinking about what are some of these really critical ideals and teachings of Baha'u'llah around the nature of individuals and humanity and the expression of that.
Yeah, I think actually now that you've shared, you're so right. Actually, there's a lot to this question, and I think there's so many facets to it. So but certainly like how we view human reality, or our approach to problem solving, also kind of being holistic, and also considering that spiritual dimension or element of humans. That's been a big thing, and also, yeah, I think just to be able to consult, to have this genuine kind of belief that if we do embrace the perspectives of others in the spirit of wanting to uncover the truth of a matter, that it actually, leads to far greater results. So to me, that is also some expression of spirituality, so to speak. Yeah.
If there's something really quite complex, or I may be nervous about, or there's a big decision to be made, or a kind of big presentation to be given, I do draw on reflection and kind of prayer in those moments as a personal kind of preparation to get through some of the more difficult things. So I guess that's privately drawing on those things is important.
There's been a few times where in C-suite board meetings of pretty large organizations, when it became clear to me that the challenge that was being faced was fundamentally spiritual in character, where I've actually utilized quotes of Baha'u'llah but really like quotes that get to the heart of that, and it's really helped also unlock or remove certain barriers. And hence, I've never had an experience where that hasn't also been received in a really positive light. But I also think it's about the motivation. Like my motivation is to contribute that to this broader kind of context. It's not anything other than just
it's drawing on that insight.
Yeah, and it's so maybe that's another way, like actually just to draw on the right things to problem solve. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say you've been compelled to have to say the remover of difficulties.
And then some. Yeah, Tablet of Ahmad is my go-to. Yeah. What fulfills you at work? And we can also go a bit broader, but
no, definitely sort of two things. I guess it is really important to me to feel like there's purpose driven in terms of what I do. And I guess all the different sorts of places I've worked, whether that's public service or I've worked on climate change, sustainability matters, or, currently looking at how do we connect people to economic opportunity? What does that mean? And that, I guess it's really important for me to have that sort of motivating factor that there's a purposefulness to that. So that's probably, and then there's the people. I mean, it is, no matter what you're doing, kind of working in teams, working with others, I get a huge amount of sort of energy off that, and I find that tremendous.
Yeah, I think you're lucky. First of all, I think you do work in a role that can actually, or that very clearly has such a decisive impact. I think sometimes, depending on the nature of the work, there's also been this connection to like potential for impact or at the level of society. But it's that latter part you explore that really also gives me a lot of fulfillment. So to have a much more expansive way of thinking about work, and also the people we work with, and what are we doing, or how do we contribute to that environment? How do we support others? How do we foster those kind of really deeper relationships where we're not transactional, where I actually care about and see them as my friends or my family? So, and I think that's also been a double-edged sword for me sometimes, because I acknowledge that that's not always the kind of mode that others operate in, but I also don't care, frankly, like how I operate or how I kind of put my heart into things obviously doesn't have to be reciprocated. But yeah, it's an interesting one. That for me is, I think, the most fulfilling thing, to actually just make sure people are okay, feeling fulfilled, growing. Yeah.
How do you navigate tricky workplace social dynamics?
I've come to realize, this idea of holding the conviction in the oneness of humanity is something that actually needs to be fostered. Like, we can't just assume that everyone is on the same page. And yes, that sounds like a big grandiose thing, but I think, like, in terms of how it translates into our daily interactions, how we can operate with a tribalist type kind of mentality, or us and them sort of tendencies. So to me, I've always just in the first instance just sought to kind of explore even that concept, very, like, obviously not in presentation, but just casually, or and to just take the time, actually, even with those perhaps that are maybe contributing to maybe a negative aspect of the culture, to actually just put time into that relationship, have coffees with them, and then maybe also just explore this, or explore the underlying frustration.
There's all sorts of dimensions to people's lives. There's all sorts of things happening in people's lives. You almost just sort of see that surface piece at work, and people can do things, say things for all sorts of reasons at different times. And I guess as you kind of get older, there's that sort of cycle of things that are happening for people, but how to manage them. To your point, just having that underlying confidence that people want to do good. They want to, they also want to try to learn, develop, grow, and be the best they can be in that work context. And I guess it's just trying to respect that, even though, sometimes people's behaviors, maybe even your own, are not as representative as you want it to be, but you can't necessarily change that. You just have to be able to have an open and honest conversation about that. And I think kind of the whole concept of truthfulness, trustworthiness, all of those kind of values mean you can bring that to a conversation if you need it.
How do you handle water cooler gossip?
Oh,
Kind of related. Yeah.
water cooler gossip. Yeah, I always try to not engage with that. So I'm a deflect kind of approach. So it does happen, but I just over time make it really clear I'm not willing to participate in that. And actually, what I've observed is people quite quickly understand that, and they won't engage you in it. And I guess that's with kind of colleagues, and I make it really clear we've got to be careful about in the workplace. Of course, there's a role for talking about people's performance, or you've got to be able to have a conversation about, let's say, the sort of behaviors someone wants to give feedback about. But there's a way to do that, and that would be the right way to do it. But engaging in kind of gossip, I'm assuming it's backbiting, but it might not necessarily be. It might just be chatter, which is absolutely fine. But I guess thinking about that in the context of if it's people trying to maybe raise criticisms or those sort of things, I think you can really not engage, or show the way you speak about things. Try and always have that kind of positive frame.
First off, who still has a water cooler? Secondly, we're all remote these days, so
it's in the margins of a Teams meeting.
Yeah, that's right. But no, I really, we've kind of touched on this a few times now. But I think when you do have a strong sense of collective identity, when you do actually have this belief that the progress of the collective, is also kind of the means whereby each of us individually progresses, and where we actually have buy-in to the lives of others, then it helps frame this kind of frustration in a constructive way. And I always kind of say to people when they are venting about someone, the first thing I'll ask is if you had a chance to create a space to openly reflect with them on this in a constructive way. So do you take Baha'i holidays off work? Good question.
Not often enough. Yeah, I mean, I do sometimes. Do you?
Yes, but it's also the same. So we need to get, I think, more disciplined about it. Yeah, I think we're also lucky because we work for ourselves, so we can sort of plan ahead, block out those days, let people know. But working, when I was working for others, once or twice I tried to, even prior to signing up, actually just let them know that I was a Baha'i, and that that these were the days that I would like to take off. And some have been very embracing of that. Others, it requires more of a conversation. But yeah, I don't know, something we could do better.
And I mean, at least there is I think there's more openness in workplaces to. But of course, that's if you're using a leave for holidays. But there's a little bit of a movement coming now with being able to apply public holidays in a flexible way, which
it's kind of I welcome it. That's nice.
Okay, so how do you handle fasting while at work?
Look, I don't know whether it's controversial or not, but those Listerine strips, and also just Listerine, I rely on that a great deal. Yeah, I mean, look, that to me is the most important thing. And to be honest, it's a lot easier now because there's all these sort of intermittent fasting and all these sort of fads. But I actually always make a point to share about the fact that it's Baha'i fasting, and actually emphasize also this idea of it being a spiritual fast. I think in the past, when that hasn't been the case, and then people know you're fasting for your faith, I've even had really strange experiences with that kind of being explored. And I think it's because I didn't actually explain it.
I actually really like fasting and going to work because it fills my day, so I don't think about the fasting. Although that sounds terrible, I'm just wishing it to go fast. But actually, I have had. I mean, it has been. I think I've learned over time to just be really clear about it. It is the most wonderful time of year, in terms of that spiritual refreshment, the kind of the physical symbolism of that, I find it so just powerful in terms of resetting. And I just think it's something to be celebrated, and really, really workplaces should make sure they're accommodating that. And I've had some funny, I've done a lot of sort of different kinds of functions and meetings, and you can't determine what day they're on. You can't just stop certain things because it's the fast. But I've literally sat through some very elaborate, formal kind of lunches, dinners, events, not eating, even hosting them.
Yeah.
And it's, and at first I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And I thought, actually, well, I'm fasting, and that's absolutely fine. And everyone else can accommodate that if they need to. And it has got, I think, easier as the concept of fasting is more discussed, and it's for a whole range of reasons. But I definitely have learned to be really clear. Okay, in fact, there was a big kind of lunch I attended this last fast, and everyone was sort of very formally seated. But I told them in advance, by the way, I'm not. So if you don't mind, ask them just not to serve me there. And actually, nobody notices whether you eat.
Food must have been really good.
It did look really good, though.
Much to your dismay. Yeah.
I did ask, can I take that for later?
That's right. No. Yeah. Also, the last thing is actually when you eat right in the morning, or if your morning routine is right, I find that the fast is probably the most productive month in my year.
Yeah.
And so, because I always also just try to preempt this kind of concern that people might not think you're on your A game, etc. Yeah. Anyway, food helps.
I've always sort of feel that there are, of course, some roles where you can't fast while you're doing
of course.
that. And, I mean, you are fasting, you're just eating while fasting.
Do you share that you're a Baha'i in the workplace?
Yes. But kind of organically. And it's not like I go around announcing.
Yeah, that's right.
You do know that.
So you don't wear a badge, or?
But I think it's a very natural thing.
Yeah.
I mean, especially as you just think about sort of changing roles, changing teams, and all those sort of transitions. It's normal. You get to know each other, and it's such an important part of, my identity that, over time you inevitably talk about it, and people want to know about you and share, just like you do for other people, and you love knowing about their different backgrounds and approach. So,
I think you just summed it up. It's a part of one's identity, and if you're fostering genuine relationships with people, it's bound to come up as a part of that. It's a reference point. So often when we're actually dealing with difficult things at work, I will draw on Baha'i principles, and then also share that that's where it comes from. I might also draw on other principles and cite that reference, but it's just, to me, just a natural part of your identity, or expression of your identity. Yeah. So how do you balance doing a good job at work with all the other parts of your life?
Oh, that's hard.
Can we just say we don't? Like we're struggling?
Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there's a genuine, I feel a sort of, I guess, as we talked about before, you really, you want to try to do the best possible job you can do, and try to sort of bring excellence and diligence to that. So, and of course, I suppose it's like lots of things. Work can just keep drawing and drawing and drawing out of you. So you do need to, you need to find that balance in there. And I guess there's so many other dimensions to life. If you've got kids, there's a time for them, and there's finding time. You need the time for yourself to nurture yourself, and be able to kind of keep regenerating the energy to go and do all those other aspects of life. But I think it's a real challenge. I mean, burnout's a real challenge for so many people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think to me this is an interesting question, but it's also one, I think, thankfully, that has been explored a lot, both within the broader context and also, I think, in the Baha'i community as well. And to me, like, two things come to mind. So one is not to create false dichotomies where there don't necessarily need to be, or this idea of coherence, and appreciating that actually if on the home front things are well, it impacts every other facet of life. And then conversely, like if my relationship to work is sound, it will also, have a bearing on other aspects. But then also really recently, we've been trying to be very conscious about also fostering like a healthy work environment. So again, as an employer, but also a big part of what we do is actually also around fostering some of these elements for within the context of our clients' workforce, and creating or being conscious of not creating aspects of culture that create undue pressure, or also skew notions of what does it mean to do good work, right? Like I think many of us have a tendency to be perfectionists. I know my wife and I, we really struggle with this, that we get really, like we impose, I think, the pressure oftentimes because we want to strive for perfection, but then to realize also actually, it's okay to switch off after a certain time in the day. That again, like work smart, not hard, kind of these kind of things as well. I mean, it's just
and it does play such an important part of our lives, and that sort of almost the obligation to contribute in that way, but not that it's not the only thing, and it shouldn't be seen as the only thing in your life. And there's so many other aspects of the kind of pattern of community life in terms of other aspects of service in whatever form they are.
And to me, this is fundamentally a question about what is your identity, because I think what you put energy into often is an expression of that. And I can't also help but reflect on the fact that the perfect exemplar to Bahais or Abdu'l-Baha, whenever he was asked what his profession was, or on forms and whatnot, he would say he was correct me if I'm wrong, like a carpet weaver, right? Like we obviously know that he did so much more than just carpet weaving, but I've always loved the fact that the person we conceive of as our perfect exemplar, when it comes to this aspect, he was a carpet weaver, and to me that says a lot about like what is our identity, and how much of that also needs to be our work. Of course, not negating the fact that it is a sphere that we can serve humanity within and should pursue with excellence, but also maybe our society tends to overemphasize it, and then that creates this unhealthy kind of work-life balance type challenge.
If you didn't need to work, what would you do with your time?
I think maybe the heart of this question is about like the utilitarian element of we work to survive, and Baha'u'llah actually writes about work as being beyond utilitarian in scope. So whether or not your circumstances allow you not to work, I think what you're doing should be what you're doing somehow. Like ideally, you should be aspiring towards that. And I actually feel like that's, luckily enough, touch wood, that's my reality. So I probably would keep doing what I'm doing. I would maybe focus a bit more on social enterprise, or maybe pick projects or ventures that are really focused on like the social impact that it's having. That would probably, as opposed to also taking on work that has this commercial dimension as well. That would probably be the big change. But then also maybe focus on also a family, contributing to my community, or continuing to like do that. Maybe the ratio would change a little bit, but I would still work.
I think you've got to the heart of the. It's not the utilitarian aspect. It's the contribution, being a sort of contributing active member of society.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's not to say the remuneration part isn't important, but I don't know if it's, if you took that away, I know that I'd still be wanting to go and make a contribution and work. Yeah, as you say, maybe it would be more, I don't know, because I guess there's just so many different aspects of kind of service you can contribute.
Also acknowledging like a degree of privilege in that statement of mine, right? Like for many, it does oftentimes take on the form of an existential reality, and like obviously that is also reality, etc. But I think, notwithstanding to anyone really on the tube, like how to take those steps to also feel that way about your work and your relationship to work, like that. Even if you do need it, of course we all need to work, but that we're also fostering it being more than that. Is it you or me?
I don't know, actually. You maybe.
Okay. In the future, human beings may not need to work for money. What do you think that will mean for society?
Yes, interesting. Well, I think that it will still mean that people work, as we just discussed, and that perhaps what will happen is people will be they'll be working in areas that the community needs. So maybe there'll be a much more direct correlation to kind of social need and the activities people do. But there's an important sort of maybe it will unleash the ability to on all sorts of creative fronts as well. Yeah.
I think this is a really great question, and one, frankly, that both individually and at the macro level, we should be exploring more and more.
Yeah.
And, there's definitely trends around universal basic income, sort of tests or pilots in various countries. And also, very contemporary in this conversation. Anyway, like this whole sudden explosion now of AI and chat GPT and all of this stuff, and we're using it for a lot of things. And I have to say, I think this question, or in terms of future, could be very soon. Like, we're not talking about decades from now, we might be talking years from now. But I also just feel like, we live in a post-industrialized world where, again, the ratio of our day is quite skewed to work. And maybe that's not the design of the pattern of life.
Life will look different.
Yeah, and I think that's also okay. And as you said, I think I don't imagine this idea of contributing to society is going to disappear, right? I think maybe this notion of work for utilitarian purposes will subside. But if anything, I think when you get rid of that, base Maslow's hierarchy of needs element, I think it's going to actually be really healthy for humanity, that it will inspire, it will allow people to really just hone in on purpose, on pursuing meaningful things, creative exploration, immersing oneself in the ocean of the writings also. And I think it's a good thing. Like, I think it will just mean the day will look a little bit more balanced somehow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I always think of farmers in this context, though, because you got to get up with...
But will you have to get up? I mean,
you think it's all going to be
well, and also, I mean, like, it's hard to imagine what the world will look like, quote unquote, in the future. But I think also our approach to many things, like farming, manufacturing, etc., all these things will change, I would think, in a world where also the means of production are becoming heavily decentralized, or you can print a phone. Even today, that's possible on a 3D printer. Like, so I think
more equitable distribution of both innovation and
or this notion of farming, even in a highly concentrated mega farming type thing, may subside. But maybe we'll all have our.
I feel like I've detoured us into
no, sorry.
Neither of us being farmers, although
but I think it wasn't.
I know I wanted to be a farmer.
We could segue that off into a different conversation about.
So, I'm going to ask you another question.
Yeah.
If you could change one thing about work culture in Australia, what would it be?
I think maybe there's two things here. So one is, and I don't know if this is work culture or just more broadly culture, but to really have a bit more of a conversation around what informs human identity, and to maybe redress what I perceive as a bit of an imbalance. I think, maybe Australia is not as bad as other parts of the world, but when you meet someone and the first question you get asked is, what do you do for a living? To me, that's a reflection a little bit of what do we value in terms of what informs identity. So I think it would be maybe that. But I also feel like there's been a really positive trend of actually becoming more expansive in the way we think about human beings in the workplace. Like I think actually there's a positive trend there. But then also the other one would be, how do we proactively ensure that the environment allows for many voices to feel like they can share freely? And I mean specifically, I've seen it a lot, but I think how do you proactively ensure that women can speak freely? And because I think we still have a way to go in terms of, not defaulting to a mode where we expect the person who doesn't feel heard to have to be the one to speak up. I don't know if that makes sense. And also, I'm thinking about that because it's been a recent issue we've had to kind of explore. Yeah.
I think, as you said, there's been a lot of positive change and reflection. I mean, of course, the pandemic precipitated a lot of things that I'd be hoping to see for some time. I think I was just remember some years ago being struck by what an important component to people's motivation was the ability to choose how they did things and the way they did that, which reflected themselves and the particular everyone's different in the way they go about work. And I think that we've crossed a bit of a threshold. There's still some way to go in terms of understanding that people can bring the best contribution if they're able to do it in a way that that
accommodates
most empowering for them. So having that ability, more empowerment to choose the way you approach, and I think that then brings out more creativity. It brings out diversity of thought. Maybe even contributes eventually to that sense that there's not one single way to do things, and having the flexibility to make more choices in the way we do things.
You also just triggered a thought. I think post-pandemic, or the pandemic really showed us also that our workplace for many is their community. And now that we're in this sort of post-office era, it'd be interesting just as a society to learn also more about fostering community in many contexts, because I think a lot of people now are missing that element, if that makes sense. So whether that's within the industry or even just more broadly within neighborhood setting or community settings, like the need for community, I think is more apparent or more of a need than it was before, because we've now actually disconnected from that community environment. So I think this might be my last question. So what advice do you give to younger people starting out and choosing a career?
My first piece of advice is that your career's long. Don't think of it as a one immediate point in time. It's really hard when you're starting. Of course, the most immediate thing is what's right in front of you in that first step. I think finding something that you enjoy is really important to the degree that you can. But there are so many, and it's really difficult because there are so many things you can do. Some people have a really clear idea of what they like, what they're good at, and there's a kind of perfect match. But it's pretty rare at that early phase to have that. So I think allow some discovery. It's a long journey through kind of work and life, and getting some of the foundations right. So finding a place where you can really learn, making that kind of early phase where you're either what you're studying is contributing to where you want to work, and that kind of early phase of work. Go somewhere you think you can really learn. And then I'm a big believer in thinking about, you can't think through the whole journey, but just sort of think, where might I want to be in what were the sorts of things I would like to have experienced, and what kind of things would I like to have done, and then that might help you think about what step to take early on. But I mean, I think we're in an era where you probably have multiple careers over your work journey. So,
the one thing that I almost default to these days, and in fact, with any aspect of life, I've become obsessed with this idea of whenever you're exploring something, are you clear about what the guiding principles are that inform that arena or aspect of your life and decisions within it? So, I don't know if you've heard of Ray Dalio, his book Principles. When I read that, I kind of thought, wow, this is incredible. It's ironic that it's a hedge fund guy that has come up with this, but I find that book is really worth reading because it really touches on this idea that we, are we clear about what our principles are to then make informed decisions? So that's one thing. And I think we're also really lucky because in the writings, there are so many of these sort of principles that you could then draw on in addition to what it is, other things that you might also value to create that, framework, and you can always adjust and reframe it. But if you're clear about that, then you can also go out and make those, take those steps, learn, etc., and have this sort of reference point to evaluate or decision making. If you do that right, then I think, you can, it'll give you the confidence you need to go out and try it. And then lastly, I think maybe one of those key principles that could inform this framework for them is this notion of, again, how does my work contribute to the collective prosperity of humanity, but also allows me to grow both spiritually and materially. So if that is a factor, then it maybe protects them perhaps from going down career paths that have really, who am I to judge, but maybe little merit, or are just for the pursuit of monetary gain, or if that makes sense, and that it becomes a bit more purposeful. Yeah.
And it's not a one-way
No.
street. Yeah, but I think sometimes it's helpful to reflect on what you wouldn't want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe try some things out.
Yeah.
You've
No
had a
more
convoluted
questions,
journey yourself.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, like, I think my own experience has been that. Yeah, I've but I think maybe there's been like an underlying theme. But yeah, I've been able to kind of transform what I do a few times over, and I think that's just the reality of life in this century. Well, that was my last question. Yeah, really enjoyed this. This was quite thought-provoking.
Thanks to Baha'i Blog.
Thank you.
I mean, when you think about the integral part of work to our life and what we talked about in terms of that sort of core purpose that it brings to us as well, it's fantastic to think more deeply about these things.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you, guys.